Adam peeped round the edge of the bedroom curtain, hoping for a glimpse of Cecily in the flat opposite. Ever since the séance, he had developed an odd interest in her. Some might call it an obsession, though he had tussled with this thought himself and had concluded that his peeping was an interest, nothing more. If she had answered his questions after the séance, if she had given him just 5 more minutes instead of dismissing him, he was sure he would not have felt the need to observe her. She never closed the curtains. She was almost inviting him to watch her. He was tired. For the last week he had not slept until the early hours. He only had to see the lights switched on above the cafe, and an unfamiliar excitement pumped adrenaline into his blood. He was a slave to her actions. The first night the window had summoned him, he had reluctantly left his watch to use the bathroom, and by the time he returned her room was in darkness. Now he kept an empty lemonade bottle on the floor by the ledge, so nothing could interrupt his commitment. He was determined not to miss anything. He had no idea what he was looking for, what he thought he may discover. He knew his actions made no sense. How could observing this woman answer the questions that continued to haunt him? However, something told him to keep watching. A voice in his head confirmed that Cecily held the key. Life hadn't turned out the way he would have liked. Here he was, a lone father caring for his needy, awkward 15-year-old daughter, fighting to keep a business afloat in which he depended on the sales of cigarettes and alcohol, mostly to loud, underage yobs. As a lonely boy with a far-fetched imagination, he had fantasized about becoming something important, maybe going into politics or being chosen as the mayor of a town, not Avis, but a good town, where people would care about what he had to say. But that was a story, a dream. His parents were not the sort of folk who nurtured successful children. Neither of them were professional in any way other than fighting. They were soul destroyers, tearing at each other's spirit, dragging it down to the ground, holding it for the count and then releasing for the next round. For Adam to dodge insults, he would have to avoid contact, stay in his room until their fights led them through the streets of Avis, and they could be heard in the distance cursing at their God-forsaken lives. None of that mattered now. His fate had been sealed, entwined in the trees of Avis, and now his days were taken up with the business and Sophie, a pretty girl if you looked beneath the braces and she wasn't screwing up her nose, and if her chin wasn't set so far forward. She wasn't like other teenagers. She didn't bring the same worries, and she wasn't argumentative, but she was awkward. She didn't try. She didn't talk to anyone, and if there ever was any chance of engagement with others, she would have the doll tucked under her arm. He knew he needed guidance to drag this girl to womanhood. Of course, a voice from the dead would not redeem him, but for some reason he believed that he had made progress. He needed to find Barbara, but to do that he needed to talk to Bridge so she could help him. It wasn't fair that a stranger had the power to summon her. Why wouldn't Bridge talk to him directly? What secrets did Cecily have? He scratched at his hands. The skin felt as though it were burning, but he had a compulsion to keep scraping at his flesh. Maybe it was fleas from the dog, or perhaps the coldness of the house had caused the scurf. Whatever it was, he considered using a sharp object to reach the relentless demand. A thud on the front door, shouting. Bruce was in the kitchen, lying on an old duvet, barking, but not moving from his spot. He chose when to bark. It wasn't something he did automatically whenever a visitor came to the door. It was random, so always unsettling and annoying. It didn't signal a threat. It sounded tired and disinterested. Adam mumbled under his breath as he trudged down the stairs, his hand rubbing along the wall, tearing more wallpaper from crumbling plaster, peppering the boarding stair carpet. The thudding continued as he pulled the latch across. All right, he said through the door. The same couple who had bothered him the night before and the night before that were waiting. The man was on the step. He was close enough for Adam to smell the stale Brill cream on his hair. The skin on his face looked worse, weeping lesions, rubbed sore. Please, can you stop your baby crying? The man asked with a steady though desperate tone demanded through clenched teeth. The woman was pulling him back from the door, trying to drag him away by one arm, telling him to keep calm. She looked dishevelled, her hair messy and her face spotted with the same scabs. Her eyes were dark and hollow. As I've told you time and time again, you're mistaken. There is no baby here, Adam whispered, hoping nobody else would hear the fuss, not wanting to disturb Sophie. Don't give me that, old man. We can hear it. Night after night, the man spat. Relentless crying. We can't sleep. It's doing my head in. He hit his own forehead with the palm of his hand. Come on, the woman whined. We have to go. We have to leave. I'm warning you, old man. Shut that baby up or I will. He staggered down the step and Adam hurriedly closed the door. He quickly forgot his annoyance as he went back up the stairs, ready to take his place again. As he passed Sophie's room, he considered checking in on her, but the overpowering urge for a glance at Cecily led him back to his post. He waited quietly. A stone hit the window. He started back and his heart raced. Another followed, and he heard the man's voice again. Shut it up! Stop it crying! He quickly moved away out of sight. He didn't want the man to see him. He didn't want Cecily to be alerted. He would have to take care of the couple, show them there was no baby. He left the room and followed the dark, narrow landing to Sophie's room. He quietly tapped on the door, no response, so he opened it to be reminded the hinges were deprived of oil, and he tiptoed in. The doll was lying on its face by her bed. Its knitted yellow romper suit looked dirty, even in the dimness of the room. He picked it up, and as it turned, the usual tired, "Mama" whine escaped its unopened lips. Sophie stirred, a mist parting her mouth with her breath, so he tucked the doll next to her and quietly left the room. Poor kid, abandoned at a time when she most needed a mother. She never asked where she had gone or if she would ever come back. In fact, she never mentioned her mother again. Barbara couldn't get over the loss of her sister. She kept blaming herself over and over until it seemed she almost enjoyed the punishment. It was a fixation, and nothing could penetrate the dark thoughts that occupied her twisting mind. She would scream into the blackness as Adam shook her out of the reoccurring dream playing over and over, screening bridge, smiling as she entered the old cinema. It was unsurprising the cries woke Sophie. She would stand in the bedroom doorway clutching the doll as she watched Adam rock her sobbing mother. Adam knew that sometimes he hadn't been so supportive. Sometimes her crying and whining would be too much for him to bear. When he tried to comfort her, she would lash out at him, accusing him of unspeakable behaviour towards Bridge. He knew she was angry. He knew she was in pain. As quickly as the nettles in the backyard took over the pathway, their lives were entrenched in mistrust and grief. Then, with no explanation, no apologies, no goodbyes, Barbara was gone. She didn't take anything with her. She left a wardrobe of old frocks and hanging over a kitchen chair her fake crocodile handbag, inside of which lay her empty tatty purse. Adam told them he was sure she had taken some cash with her, so the police in Whitney were reluctant to investigate. They didn't need many excuses to stay away. There were many disappearances in Avis, and this one gave some hint that the person had left of their own free will. Who could blame her? From then onwards, Sophie would not put the doll down. It went everywhere with her. Bridge had given it to her the Christmas before. Sophie named it Estrid and rocked it in her arms as she hummed an unfamiliar tune. Bridge wondered where the strange name had come from, but Sophie was a strange girl, so it wasn't so peculiar. It all seemed so long ago, a time when everything seemed normal, but now the doll was the comfort the poor girl needed. Guy Fawkes' night, it had the potential to be a busy one. Adam felt dreadful, his body duping him, telling him he was hungry, ravenous. But as soon as he had eaten anything, one way or another, he was expelling it. His mouth was dry. It had been ever since he had sipped the tea Cecily had given him. He didn't want to sit in the shop. He wanted to stay in his bedroom by the window, but he needed the business to keep running. He told Sophie she would have to pull her weight. Previously he had tried to teach her the till, but she had sulked because he had forced her to leave the doll in her room, and she sat in the corner with Bruce leering at the customers. This evening would be different. He would leave her in the shop on her own. She would have to cope. He mumbled through the basics. The smell of the alcohol and cigarettes made his stomach churn. He had to leave. She looked at him afraid, knowing this time he really was going to abandon her. But the look was not enough for him to change his plans. The scratches on his hands were deep and bleeding. It would put the customers off. She stood by the till, not taking her eyes away from the door for even a second, waiting for the first customer to enter. The bell would clang and she would be in the spotlight. She was sure she was too young to be serving in an off-licence, but her father didn't seem to care. Nowadays he had very little time for her. He spent most of his evenings on lookout, peeping around the curtain, as though he was expecting something bad from the outside to try to get in at them. His actions made her more anxious. One night she heard arguing and looked out of her bedroom window. A man lashed out at a woman, knocking her to the ground. She staggered to her feet, and as he tried to grab her, she managed to run away. Sophie watched him chase her, both disappearing into the darkness as they headed towards the Weeping Lakes. Then she saw her father appear, holding a carving knife towards the direction of the couple. He looked up at her window and she stepped back quickly, hoping he hadn't seen her. The flat was cold. Her father didn't seem to notice. There was no warmth anymore. The shop was cold. She was freezing. She missed Bridge. She missed her mother. She hoped the rain would stop people coming out, and she hoped she wouldn't have to fumble with the till as they watched her protruding knuckles scratching for their change. It was no weather for fireworks. She saw two girls run past, the rain hitting them hard. Bruce noticed them too and sat up, clicking his jaw as he yawned, then scratched and lazily dropped his head back onto the carpet. She was glad he was with her. She didn't feel so alone when she had Bruce and Estrid with her. She started to relax a little. She opened a marathon, and after eating it, she opened another. The nuts stuck in her braces, so she rubbed her tongue back and forth over them just in case a customer did appear. She helped herself to a Sprite. She envisioned her dad looking angry and telling her she mustn't eat the profits. The sound of a firework jolted her, the can's contents overflowing onto the till. Squatting down at the shelves below the counter, looking for a clock, she heard the bell toll. There was a customer. She stayed hidden, trying not to breathe, listening to the sound of footsteps drenched and trudging around the shop. Bruce didn't make a sound. He must have been familiar with the customer. She took a deep breath and with all her courage stood up for the first time, smiling, and said, "Can I help you?" Despite the speed in which the Bailey boy held out his magnet, the pain was excruciating, yanking the braces that pulled her teeth from her jaw. The blood gushed over the till and she screamed a high-pitched, piercing, jarring squeal that shocked Bruce into action. He growled at the phantom. It wasn't Mark anymore. It was a wet, slimy creature wearing the boy's face and clothes, sneering at Bruce as it turned and left the shop. Adam came from the back of the off-licence. His face was white and his pullover was stained with vomit. He was holding the carving knife. "He's here, Daddy!" Sophie sobbed, holding her mouth and pointing at the door. He didn't know what he was looking at. Had Barbara returned? Did Sophie know what he had done? What had he done? It was Cecily. She must have told her. Now he understood. As clear as he could see her room from his window, it was obvious she must have been watching them. She could have seen Barbara throwing things at him. She could have seen him defending himself. That was how she knew what to say at the séance. He didn't know if he was in a nightmare. He stumbled out into the rain. There was nobody around. How could there be? The rain was torrential. An abundant stream rushed over his socked feet. He looked up at Cecily's window and he saw the light come on. He watched as she abruptly closed the curtains. Something hit him in the back, a hard, awkward fist. Not now! Why wouldn't the couple give him some peace? Leave me alone, he shouted, turning and sinking the knife into Sophie's chest. He watched her anguished face, teeth missing, rain, snot, tears, blood pouring. She held out her hand and fell to the ground. Then he heard it, the baby crying.